Professor Tillman, I'd like to get back to you. Now, we have some reports saying that Russia is sharing satellite imagery and improving Iran's drone targeting against United States forces. At what point does that kind of support even cross a line for Washington? And also, what specific action would trigger a stronger response?
It's difficult to know. Of course, Russia has been a long-standing ally of Iran, and Iran has also provided significant material support, particularly large numbers of the Shahed drones that have been so damaging in the Ukraine conflict on civilians and civilian infrastructure. So Russia has long-standing links and has been the main provider of nuclear technology for Iran externally. So it's in a sense not surprising that Russian might be involved. I think they've been fairly careful to this point, with perhaps limited capacity, very much distracted by the Ukraine war, to assist Iran, but also would be very cautious about antagonizing Washington. It's very difficult to predict the response from Washington. I mean, this really, they're acting, Israel and the United States, in concert completely as imperial powers, claiming absolute impunity from the laws of war and from any kind of negotiated settlement at this point. So it's really not clear what the end game is, or exactly how Russia or China or other nuclear armed states might become involved on the Iranian side and really escalate the dangers of wider escalation of this conflict.
Professor Tillman, considering your expertise, I'd also like to know what's more dangerous, destroyed nuclear sites or hidden ones, because after strikes on key facilities, Iran says parts of its nuclear program are now under the rubble, with material possibly bedded or even inaccessible. Your thoughts on this?
Sure. Well, all nuclear facilities contain dangerous radioactive materials as well as nasty chemical materials. It's somewhat good news in a dark situation that the attacks that have already occurred on Iran's nuclear facilities primarily focused on its ability to enrich uranium and fabricate that material for nuclear fuel, while they've resulted in local contamination, radioactive and chemical, at those sites in Natanz and Arak and Isfahan. Reportedly, they haven't resulted in off-site contamination, although our capacity to know about what might be happening on the ground is now very limited, given the International Atomic Energy Agency, since the Israeli and American attacks on Iran last June, have no longer been able to operate in the country. Thankfully, the most dangerous sites from the point of view of potential catastrophic radiological releases, the nuclear reactors, both the research reactors and particularly the larger power reactor at Bushehr, they have so far been spared from this conflict. I very much hope that that remains the case, but of course they're vulnerable not only to direct military attack, either by intention or by accident. Terrible, hopefully, accidents have already happened in this war, particularly with the attack on the school at Minab that killed over 170 school children last week. But nuclear plants are vulnerable not just from direct attack, but also from disruption to the power and water supply, which provides the essential cooling that the reactors and the spent fuel pools that contain the hot radioactive fuel need for several years after the fuel comes out of the reactor. So these facilities are quite vulnerable, not just to direct attack, but to disruption of the infrastructure, the water and power services that they need for continuous cooling. So those are of particular concern that could cause wider radiological releases that could affect not just people in Iran, but also in the region, particularly in South Asia, extending across to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and even India.
Professor, I'd also like to know, since Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israeli strikes killed a top nuclear scientist and even challenged the nuclear leadership in the country, does killing scientists really slow things down?
Of course, it will slow things down, and there's been a combination of cyber attacks as well as direct targeting and assassinations of key nuclear scientists in Iran over some decades. So, but any determined nation, their technology to produce, to come close to nuclear weapons capacity, to produce nuclear weapons grade material, to develop the design expertise for nuclear weapons, is within the reach of any nation. This is publicly available knowledge. So it's not possible to constrain the capacity to produce nuclear weapons by military means alone. This simply requires negotiated regimes with effective verification and enforcement provisions globally that all nations observe. This kind of unilateral military action is much more likely to drive proliferation and the determination of nations that what has now happened to Iran, following what has happened to Venezuela, what previously happened to Iraq and Libya without nuclear weapons. It's much more likely to provide an incentive for nations to develop nuclear weapons than it is to deter them.
Professor, now Donald Trump, US President, he has said the focus is on hitting missiles and drones, not nuclear material for now. On the other hand, Israel is openly talking about regime destabilization. And as we speak, Foreign Minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, has insisted that the killing of top officials in the country will not be a setback for Iran's government. Now, considering from the side of Israel and United States, the goals look completely different. Are these two strategies aligned, or are they heading toward different end goals?
It's really difficult to know, and I wouldn't pretend to try and understand what the end game is here. There have been conflicting messages about how brief this conflict would be, about how it would be targeted to Iran's nuclear capacity, then much more extensively to its military capacity generally and to the regime, to keeping the Straits of Hormuz open for oil transport internationally. There's been mixed messages about that, about the possibility of ground troops going in. So I think we honestly don't know. But what we do know is that this is a slippery slope where thus far there has been wide escalation, including civilian targets, not just, and military targets widely across the country, thousands of targets. As well as severe civilian impacts, and we really have no clear idea of where this might stop. But clearly, any further escalation in terms of ground invasion, anything that risks involving other states, particularly nuclear-armed states, poses profound risks for the world, as well as the general lawlessness that we're seeing nuclear-armed states claim with these aggressive, illegal military actions.
Well, thank you, Professor, for making time for us and breaking this entire scenario down for us. Thank you.
Thank you.